Hi, Tami. Welcome to the Miracles Happen Fertility Podcast.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here.
Likewise, you and I were talking about that. I have your book and I didn't know it.
I know. As I said, there's just weird ways that the universe brings us all together, and sometimes we come full circle. And I feel like that's what's happened here with you.
Indeed. Background for watchers and or listeners, Tami and I have been posting very similar things on Instagram, not knowing, and somehow like very really similar, almost verbatim.
I know, and I was laughing earlier that we have like the same color scheme going on. So for whatever reason, this podcast is just meant to be. But and I was also sharing that we just finished a fully fertile book group with 12 lovely ladies that we did virtually, and just got word shortly after the book group ended that one of them got pregnant. So we're just, yay. It's funny in the world of fertility because you really don't want to hear about other people's pregnancy unless you know they've suffered enough. And so there's something oddly kismet about this group coming together, because when you start to hear everybody else's stories, you start to cheer for them. So it's just been really interesting to watch how we all sort of support each other when we find out that they've finally achieved that goal of pregnancy. So it's been beautiful.
Yeah, when you learn other stories, there's something that becomes quite comforting and brings you hope.
Exactly.
So just to let folks know who you are, Tami is co-founder of Pulling Down the Moon, which is also that's your Instagram handle, right? Pulling Down the Moon.
Right.
And you have like this giant bio. I'm just taking pieces from it today. People, I go to the website, pullingdownthemoon.com, and you can read about Tami and the co-founder, other co-founder. So Tami is where do I start? So, well, let's just say Pulling Down the Moon is a holistic fertility center. And Tami herself is a registered yoga teacher with training including in-depth studies in the principles and practices of mystical yoga tradition, including Kriology and Ayurveda. I want another podcast episode on Ayurveda alone. Can we?
Yeah, that's a big topic, right?
Yeah.
I'm certainly not an expert on it, but it's good stuff.
Training in it, yes. She's a Reiki master and an ordained Swami. Studies have included doctrine of karma, meditation, guided imagery, hatha yoga, breathing techniques, sacred texts. Holy cow, it's like the list goes: astrology, religions of the world, dream interpretation, language of symbols, pastoral care. What I really love, all that I love, but Tami uses her training as a Swami to create fertility-specific rituals, clearings, meditations, and yoga classes, which help women struggling with disappointment, losses, and the stresses associated with infertility. The list goes on. Like, what don't you do?
I don't know. It's funny because I haven't read my bio in so long, and I hear it back and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. So thanks for the reminder. But I swear it's not all correct. Sounds like it's cracked up to be, but thank you.
Yeah. So you've had your hands in this work for a long time, and you have a lot of depth in what you do. I am so glad and so happy to be speaking with you today. So first, I just like to get from everybody that I speak with, I like to get a history or how you've come to do the work that you do, story. So
yeah, I mean, my story goes back. I started out my life as an advertising executive, sort of a type A, always taught that if you work hard enough, you can always get what you want. So I graduated college. My most recent advertising job was with Martha Stewart Living, and it was this amazing, DIY and make your home beautiful, and was newly married, and told my husband when we did get married, I'm like, let's make sure that we travel the world and climb the corporate ladder and save our money, and I'm not thinking about children for at least 5 years into our marriage. And I had this whole thing plotted out. And I know this story sounds familiar because a lot of women that probably come to you for coaching or therapy, and listening to your guests on intuition, the people that come to us have similar stories about being highly successful, highly motivated, highly stressed types of individuals. And, I was one of them. So after the 5-year, requirement of being married and then going off the pill and starting to try, it wasn't happening like I thought it was going to happen. So my fertility story went on to, graduation from my OB, seeing a reproductive endocrinologist, doing, shots and hormone therapy. And I remember just getting really, really discouraged, had a miscarriage. And one day as I was walking with my husband back from a doctor's appointment, I said, we just have to face the fact that we just may never be parents. And he looked at me and he said, well, why would you say that? If we want to be parents, we'll be parents. And I was like, like this mind-blowing aha moment where I thought to myself, he's right. Like, what if it's just not in the way that I envision? What if being a parent means that I have to open my mind up to what I really want? Have I been focusing too much on the biological pregnancy? And should I shift my focus and my intention to actually being a mother? And when I started to shift that mindset and focus on being a mother, ironically enough, the very next month, I ended up conceiving twins. And I have boy-girl twins who are celebrating their 23rd birthday on Thursday. So it changed my life. But in the course of that journey, I realized that there was very few resources for women to find support, to find healing outside of traditional medicine. So I really delved into yoga theory, yoga philosophy, the spiritual teachings, and in that sort of journey, decided I was going to start teaching yoga for fertility and that this would be my calling. And along the way, ended up meeting Beth Heller, who was one of the yoga teachers at a studio where I was teaching. And I met her because I was due to teach her classes for her when she went out on maternity leave. And so I'd been preparing to take over her classes as a yoga teacher. And at 38 weeks of pregnancy, I got a phone call that she had a stillbirth. So her whole world turned upside down. And instead of sort of covering her maternity leave, I covered a grieving process that she went through. When she finally did come back to the yoga studio and begin teaching again, she and I had a conversation about this journey, about fertility, about loss, about disappointment. And she had actually written a thesis on yoga for fertility years ago. And so it was, again, an odd synchronicity that I had this germ of an idea to start a yoga for fertility class, and she had already written a thesis about it. So we decided that together we would start Pulling Down the Moon, which would be this place where women could come and explore the holistic natural side of fertility, not instead of medical fertility, but sort of in addition to, if that's the choice that they made. So we launched acupuncture, yoga, massage therapy, and nutrition counseling, all specifically focused for fertility. And that was back in, I think 2002, fall of 2002. So it's been over 18 years, or just about 18 years.
Beautiful. Oh, you need a location I was in New Jersey at the time, but you need locations everywhere.
Well, it's funny because, we started in Chicago and then we expanded to Washington, D.C. with Shady Grove Fertility, one of the biggest fertility clinic in the country. And so we were their holistic arm. And so we actually just turned over full operations to them and sold the business to them a couple years ago. And so I've just been focusing on Chicago, and now I live in Los Angeles, and I keep thinking like, should I do it here? Should I start something on the West Coast? And would Beth come out? And, there's sort of something very comforting about Beth and my partnership as business owners too, where, we're sort of the yin and yang of the business. And so I feel that it would sort of be off kilter, sort of a little imbalance if one of us started something without the other. So she'd have to be on an airplane a lot, which we know just can't happen right now, but still thinking about it.
Yes, it's percolating, it sounds like. What does Pulling Down the Moon mean?
So We were at, Beth and I were at Unicorn Cafe in Evanston, Illinois, dreaming about what we could create. And we said, what would the name of this be? What would the name of it be? We started thinking about symbolism and archetypes that would really fit what we were trying to do. And we decided that the moon was the perfect symbol of fertility because, first of all, we know that the moon has a 28-day cycle, which is similar to a woman's period cycle. And we also know that in astrology that the moon symbolizes the sign of Cancer, and it's also meant to be sort of a symbolism of motherhood. The moon in astrology is also meant to be very emotional, but nurturing and motherly. So we were like, we need something about the moon. And then there is an actual meditation called Drawing Down the Moon, where you sort of envision and meditate over bringing the energy of the moon into your body or into your soul. And we felt that that was really important symbolism because to us, a woman embodies everything that is mother, whether or not she has a child. And yes. The other thing that's really important is that you can look up into the night sky and you may only see a crescent moon, but the moon is always full. We just don't see it as always full. So
like it chills. Oh, I love that.
We want women to understand that they are always full, whole, and complete. They just can't always see it. They just sometimes only see the crescent, but all that the moon embodies, its fullness, its richness, is always deep inside of them.
Oh my goodness. Profound. Thank you. I'm so glad I asked that. Beautiful.
It's a long name, but we felt, and we don't always get to explain what the name means, but it's very meaningful for us. And we think that once people hear it, it'll resonate.
Yeah. 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 And right. Long name or not, it's so deeply meaningful. Yeah, as I said, I got chills with that explanations. I'm sure your clients do too. Okay. So after reading your bio, folks know now that you do a ton of holistic work. And what we were talking about before I pressed record today was that what I really liked, and I've had your book for a long time, what I've really loved about it and pointed out to folks about it is that it's got all the things, mindset, emotion stuff, psychological stuff, spiritual stuff that I really find is integral to fertility and embodying motherhood, whether or not you have a child. But what I'd like to talk about today, because there is so much, is the spiritual aspect. And my listeners and watchers know that I'm big time into the spiritual side of things. And I know that you and I could talk probably for days on all this stuff, but I really want to focus on that. And one of the things that I read in your book was about, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, is it Koshas? Koshas. Okay. So can you explain koshas and why they're important for fertility?
I certainly can. And, it's one of those funny little Sanskrit words. And I want to just preface our conversation too, that everything that I sort of discuss or bring to the table is really from a yoga philosophy perspective. That's really where my wheelhouse is. And in that philosophy, it's also very all-encompassing. So whether you come to your fertility journey or come to spiritual fertility from a religious perspective or a certain tradition or culture or dogma, whatever it is, that we really believe that all paths lead to God. And so it's really accepting in that way. And the kosha model is it's a sort of a yoga therapy concept that is born of the idea that we have a light bulb that sits inside of our lamp. I'm using a metaphor here, but this light bulb is the pure light. But what ends up happening is we put a lampshade over it. So the koshas, by definition, are meant to be are sheaths or layers. And so it's believed that there are all these layers that surround our light bulb. And the light bulb is really our true self, our true soul, our perfection, that moon inside of us that's always which is always full. So the first layer or lampshade around that light is really our physical body. And there's a fancy name for it too in Sanskrit, which is the Annamaya Kosha, which is a mouthful. So we won't focus on those names specifically, but to know that the physical body is the entryway into spirit. And the next one is really your breath body or your pranamaya kosha. And the breath body is to say that, you know, the inhales and the exhales are very, very important because they lead us to a deeper part of ourselves. They quiet the physical body. And once we learn some sort of breath control or mindful breathing, we are then able to penetrate the third layer or sheath, which is the mental body. And I think a lot of us live in our physical and our mental body. But what's interesting about the kosha model is that they say, if this is your physical body and this is your mental body, we're either always hanging out in our thoughts or we're always miserable in our body. And the way that you connect the two is through the breath. So by learning certain breathing techniques, you can understand when you're really, 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 really fatigued or feeling body aches or tired, that when you start to slow your breathing or relax a little bit more, it can affect the way that you are thinking and the stress that you're experiencing. So those are the first three koshas or layers to our inner self. The fourth one is what we call the wisdom body. And you've talked about that at length through some of your podcasts, which is really that all-knowing intuition. It's not a logical state and it's not an emotional state. It's a feeling state, something that is directly down the center. And we love that in yoga because if you know, at the end of our yoga practice, we always put our hands together and we bow and say namaste, which is the divine in me bows to the divine in you. Well, that divine is your light bulb. That is your pure essence. And by sort of bringing our hands together, we're symbolizing the bringing together of extremes, the bringing together of our emotions, the bringing together of our logic, and really finding that feeling state through intuition. So that's the fourth layer or kosha. And the fifth one is really when you start to penetrate all those different layers and you get in closer to that pure self, that pure light, and that's your bliss body. Because when you're really connected with your bliss body, it is ultimate happiness. There is living in the moment and being fully present. And we all know, if you've read The Power of Now, that in this moment, which I think a lot of us have, in this moment, we are okay. We are safe because we're not thinking about things we did that were wrong in the past and we're not fearing the future. And so connecting with that bliss body is really being present.
Just a there.
There you go. So you're already connected with your breath body. I heard a big deep breath there.
Yes. I often, when I'm working with folks, when they do that big sigh, I don't call it bliss body, but that's what it is. Cause it's just there, just being there.
Right. And sometimes it's just this automatic response, like the body kicks in and it's like, sigh of relief. But it's really, I mean, think about a sigh of relief. What is that? It's like all of the tense and the stress and the things that you experience in your physical body, something just the mind saying to let it go, and that breath taking over the body. So it's a beautiful process. And, you know, my yoga guru, you know, who was able to continue teachings into his late 80s, had said, you're not born into this world with a certain number of years, you're born with a certain number of breaths. And so the longer that you can prolong your breathing, or the more deep breaths you can take, the more you prolong your life. And I love that symbolism. I think that's a great way to look at life. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Absolutely. I'm going to be taking that perspective from now on.
Right. Deep breaths. Don't you just hate though when I have to say the one thing I don't like is when, you know, life's very chaotic and somebody will be like, breathe.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, please. Like, it's so much more complicated than that. So I always feel like you're doing a little, you know, slapstick across the face. But so the intention is there. But I think sometimes when you look at somebody and say, breathe, that's not very helpful.
Nope. It's the same as just relax and it'll happen.
Exactly. And I think a lot of our fertility gals can relate to the just relax quote. Boy, that's another one of those, like.
Or when I'm like really irritated and my husband says, you need to calm down.
Oh.
No.
I'm like, Taylor Swift wrote a song about that. We're not going there.
Shall I play it for you now?
Exactly.
No, it's a conscious inward choice, right? I'm going to breathe now. I'm going to notice my breath work. I'm going to notice the slowing down.
Well, because it only works when you still the body. Let's go back to that Kosha model. It's like you can't go to the second level without, you can't go to the second floor without getting on at the first floor. So it's like the elevator. Like there are certain natural laws of physics that apply in anything that you do in life. And so you can't say to somebody, just breathe when they're, completely stressed and they're tense and they're running around like crazy. So the first step is really to calm the physical body. That's how you then get to that second, third, fourth, and fifth kosha. So calming the physical body is, it's not easy. That's where yoga, and in our world, like yoga becomes really important, because simply doing a forward fold can help create a relaxation response and help you sort of get to all those other layers of your being.
Yeah, this is off the beaten path a little bit from my questioning, but so one of the ways that I resolved my own fertility struggles before we were even parents was beginning yoga. And now I come from a family of engineers, right? So they're very left brain, very 1 + 1 always equals 2. And I'm like, all right, I've done all that. It didn't work. What's this yoga and meditation shit? I guess I'll give that a go. I'm going to prove that wrong, because that's not going to work either. But I realized when I started doing yoga specifically that is the start, or it was the start of my ability to let go. Yeah. Because physically I was so tense, and various instructors would talk about this letting go process physically. And so when I was able to let go physically, something happened emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, where I was finally able to just let go. And so I am not a yoga teacher, but I prescribe it all the time. Get yourself some yoga.
Marie, you talk about something really, really important and often misunderstood, which is this letting go process. Mm-hmm. And people often, when you're like, a yoga teacher says, well, let go. Well, that's easier to understand in the physical body when you can release and let go of the muscle. But in the mental body, letting go sounds really scary for a lot of people, because they somehow believe that letting go means that they have to adopt an attitude of apathy or disconnectedness. And I think that what you and I have both learned from sort of our own studies and our own experiences, which is letting go in the term of what we're describing, is the understanding and the intuitive knowing that no matter what happens, the universe will take care of you. Yep. That no matter what happens, you are on the path that you are meant to be on, and everything is exactly as it should be. And when it is meant to change, it will change. And therefore, the letting go is stepping into the flow of the universe and saying, I surrender to my greater self. I surrender to God, the saints and sages, the universe, cosmic energy, whatever it is that you want to call it, with the knowing that I will be fine and this will all be the way it is meant to be. And so I think that there is a really important distinction between apathy and letting go, in the sense that we're talking about. And I think what you're describing is really important for someone on the fertility journey.
Absolutely. Well, people often equate letting go with giving up, and it's completely the opposite. It actually brings you more control when you let go. Weird to say, it's an oxymoron, and yet that's what happens.
Exactly.
But we could do a whole other podcast about that. In fact, I have. I haven't talked about that, but just wanted to get into that yoga piece, where that's where it really I had an understanding of what it meant to let go, because I was still in the pose, and actually it was a lot easier.
And I think a lot of people that we see will be like, oh, I don't like yoga. oh, okay, why don't, it's like, I don't like yoga either because I can't get myself into a pretzel position, or that it's too slow. I like things that are more rigorous. And so it drives me crazy because I like a faster exercise. And so we always say, like, you're the exact person then that needs yoga, because what ends up happening is that we throw ourselves out of balance, and we end up on a treadmill where we really can't get off. And oftentimes, you know, people that are kind of like, go, 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 these are the ones training for a marathon, working out every day, you know, highly motivated, highly stressed. And so doing something that's really difficult, which is stepping back into a slower yoga practice, can be the best thing for them. And you know, people that are worried that they don't have enough flexibility to do yoga. I mean, yoga is all about, come to me with your stiffest, sorest muscles, and we will gradually make them more nimble. So, you know, there's a lot of, like, you know, wisdom in just allowing the body to do what it can do, and only that much, or walking the edge between sort of, you know, being really stiff and unflexible and going a little bit further and seeing how far you can go. So lots of really interesting symbolism even in yoga, right?
Yes. Yes. And another big one, comparing you to you and not comparing you to other people. Mm-hmm. Comparing your body to your body week to week or day to day or month to month, as opposed to other people. There's so much wisdom in yoga.
I know.
I can talk it up like crazy.
That's why we like it so much. That's why it's good for fertility, people. Do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Do it.
Yep.
All right. So moving on with the actual interview part. Thank you for taking that diversion with me. One of my most favorite things in your book is a quote that I'd love to read. It says, "We do not view infertility as an illness, nor do we ascribe to the belief that a woman who has difficulty conceiving is broken and needs to be healed." I'm wondering if you can talk more about this as well. In the book, following that quote was like a little box about the origin of disease. And this is, I think, more of what we were talking about, the Koshas, bliss body, wisdom body, etc. But can you riff on that a little bit about the belief that infertility is an illness and women are broken, or men are broken, need to be healed?
What we've seen in 18 years is a lot of women end up coming to pulling down the moon after multiple failed cycles, or being at the, you know, depths of despair, or having a horrible loss, or feeling at wit's end. And, you know, they come to us and they're in physical, mental, and spiritual crisis. And some of the things that we hear are, my body is broken. You know, my husband probably wishes that he'd married a fertile girl. We are running out of money on fertility treatments. I feel like this is some sort of karmic retribution for something I must have done years ago, and this is payback. So we hear all these stories, and, you know, our goal is to really remind you again that you are happy, healthy, whole, and complete just the way you are. And that oftentimes in the process of fertility, we are always looking at the problems outside of ourselves. That's another issue, which is like, you know, my doctor did this, my nurse didn't do that, my cousin was insensitive about this, my mother-in-law said this. And so we are constantly taking in all of these energetic thought forms, right? So whether we're creating the thought form or we're absorbing it from the world outside of us, we want women to know that you have the ability to pick and choose what energy you're going to be absorbing into your life. Mm-hmm. And we really look at fertility as, you know, you have a garden hose outside, and sometimes it's all coiled up, and you go and you turn the water on, and you realize that the water's not shooting out because there's a kink in your hose. And that's really what can happen with the koshas. That's what, you know, Chinese medicine refers to as qi, or the Japanese as ki. There's all kinds of different names for this life force energy. And it's when you're absorbing all these negative thought forms, or these beliefs that you're holding so close to, that you're creating little energetic kinks all over your body. And therefore, the life energy that is meant to flow freely, naturally, and without obstruction becomes obstructed. And that's one of the reasons why we feel practices like acupuncture, yoga, Reiki can help to start unkink the hoses, because what ultimately happens as those little kinks begin to appear all over your energetic anatomy, they create uneasiness in the body. And when we refer to disease, it's really interesting that it could be DIS-EASE, dis-ease, uneasiness in the body. So oftentimes, according to yoga philosophy, there are certain things that we absorb energetically that we hold on to that create physical ailments. And we can see this just from how many of you have experienced a highly stressful day where by the end of the day you have a headache and your neck is stiff and, you know, the stress is causing a physical headache, right? So we can see it, you know, in other heart patients where high stress causes high blood pressure. High blood pressure, you know, leads to, heart disease or metabolic syndrome. And the next thing you know, you're on cholesterol meds or you have a heart attack. So a lot of this starts at the basis of what kind of energy we're inhaling and what sort of thought forms that we have. So we believe that when you come to pulling down the moon, the way that you start to get rid of dis-ease is sort of an intervention, and that intervention are the holistic tools. Now, is it to say that, you know, the only way that you can get rid of these energetic kinks is through acupuncture, yoga, massage, Reiki? No. Sometimes simply being in your garden and pulling weeds or playing a classical piece on the piano day after day are the kinds of natural therapies that can take you to a different sort of mindset. And I'm sure, Maria, you sort of talk about this in your practice, sort of the value of finding something that inspires you or takes you to a different place in your brain. So do you sort of encourage that as well?
Not sort of, absolutely.
Yeah.
And everybody's different, right? So like, what I find most often, and you probably find this too, is that people that come to you with the fertility struggles, used to be this other person. I used to play classical piano. I used to garden. I used to crochet. I used to whatever creative endeavor. I used to paint, that they don't do anymore because taking care of fertility is often a full-time job in addition to other jobs. And so, yes, I absolutely encourage people to find that about them. And if they didn't have that before their fertility struggles, find something that really lights them up inside.
Right. And I think the other thing that's important to mention is, you know, we had a student one time that said, so are you saying that, you know, people that get cancer, that's because they sort of had negative energy and they created their own disease? No, you know, that's not what we're saying. I think it's important to just be mindful about the kind of energy and the kind of thoughts that you are taking in, but that's not to say that this is a cure-all. It's not to say that this is not going to prevent you from having disease, but it is to say that there are certain things that create stress in our lives that we do have control over, and that stress can often manifest into physical ailments that we can be relieved through these sort of natural therapies.
Yeah, absolutely. And basically what I'm hearing you say a lot is that so much of this is energy. Even physical stuff is all broken down at the smallest level, right? There we are, particles and waves, you know, not at the risk of sounding nerdy with my quantum physics stuff, but.
No, I love that. Yeah. And I think, you know, you just look at some of the laws of physics too, which is like matter can neither be created nor destroyed. And so when you look at quantum physics too, there is this sort of theory now that energy, or that thoughts have energy, and that when you think a thought, that energy goes out into the world. So the question I have is, if those thought energy bubbles are all over the world, do we ever really think of an original thought, or do we just bump into them?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And that takes us back to, see, I told you we could talk forever. Back to the origins of everything, right? We're all one. We're all right. Quantum entanglement.
What if none of us ever had an original thought? We just keep bumping into each other's thoughts, and we have been doing this since the beginning of time. And so there is something really interesting about the oneness of the universe, if that were true.
Yeah. And also, just to go back to the whole thing about the cancer thing, I like to say, and I wrote this in my book too, at the risk of sounding I don't want to sound blamey or anything like that, but when I talk about that with people, I talk about your physical ailments or any ailments that you have, mental health, whatever. It's not your fault.
Right.
And it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to take care of it. It's both, right? It's not your fault, and it's your responsibility to do something now, because when you know better, you do better. And you're now knowing better.
I love that. That's right.
Yeah. This is why yoga, meditation, but that speaks to you and I, right? And other people might do different things, and that's completely fine.
That's right.
So, all right. We talked a little bit about breath work a little bit ago, and I'm wondering if we can expand on that. It's on my mind because right now I am quarantined. I am in my bedroom on the bedroom floor, not in my office, and it's been a little crazy. And I started doing yoga again because that's where I go. I hadn't been practicing for a little while, and I went back to yoga, and I'm doing this 30-day yoga challenge on YouTube or something. It's really fun. And she started doing some breath stuff that I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this doing in my body? This is interesting. So she was doing like lion breath yesterday, Ujjayi breath. Yeah, so there's all these different ways of breathing. I'm wondering if you can speak to a few of those for folks and what they do.
I think, from the yoga philosophy, and even modern medicine really believes in the power of the breath. So if we just look at the fight or flight response, if you are camping and you walk out of your tent and you see a big brown bear in the woods coming towards you, what happens? It's like your breathing escalates, your eyes start to dilate, your heart rate increases, and the blood shunts out to all of your extremities because you are preparing to either fight the bear or you're going to flee and run away from the bear. In both cases, you sort of need that extra blood flow in your hands and your arms and in your legs. So a lot of us end up in a permanent state of fight or flight, right? We're just constantly go, 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 go. Our hearts are racing, our eyes are dilated. We want to know what's next. I think quarantine's been really interesting because I think a lot of people are going to have this realization that they've been going 100 miles an hour, and that how completely insane their lives were. And so we sort of had the Great Depression. I think we're going to end up calling this the Great Realization because we're all going to have some sort of profound knowledge of how we really operate in the world. But the value of breathing is that once you can learn that breath control, and once you can slow down your breathing, you are really decreasing cortisol levels. You're decreasing a lot of those stress hormones in the body that are raging. And we know that hormones, and stress hormones in particular, can affect fertility because of the way that the hypothalamic pituitary axis works in relation to the stress hormones in our body. And so there's a great deal of value to slowing down your systems. And there are a lot of different breathing techniques. So, lion's breath, where you're like, opening up your mouth and sticking your tongue out and really like opening up the face and the heart is really meant to be sort of a cathartic release, and so yeah, right. And a funny looking one. I mean, it's like we always say, if you're gonna do lion's breath, don't look around the room because people are so self-conscious of how they look.
But then also that it goes back to that thing where you begin to own who you are, and it's okay to own and know who you are and compare you to you only. So
yeah, I love that.
Yeah,
I know. I think that there's and that's when yoga's working. I think yoga's working when either you see a change in your personality for the better, or you are able to accept yourself for who you are, and you don't care what you look like in a hip opener. You don't care what you look like in lion's pose. And again, it's not apathy. It's loving yourself.
Yes, very different.
It's very different. Mm-hmm. There is a breathing technique to help stoke the fires in your body. So if you're feeling lethargic and you're feeling sluggish, Kapalabhati, where you're actually like stoking, it's quick inhales and exhales and you're stoking your abdomen. So that's Kapalabhati. There is Samavriti, where the inhales equal the same number as the exhales, so that you're sort of evening your breathing pattern out. One that I really love is called Satali. So I'm of the age where now I have to start thinking about, menopause and hot flashes. So Satali is where you curl your tongue and you inhale through your tongue, and it actually feels like a wet blanket is being put over your entire body. So it's really meant to reduce heat. So,
oh, like a taco tongue.
yep, taco tongue. And then an exhale through the nose so that the tongue can re-moisten. And then you...
wow. What is that? Okay.
So that's called Satali. And that, for all you ladies that tend to overheat or might be going through some hormone changes, that's a wonderful breath for decreasing heat in the body. So, if you are with an experienced yoga practitioner, breath work can be used therapeutically. And I think we're often caught up on this idea that, oh, it de-stresses you. Breath work, helps to relax you. Oh gosh, breath work can get rid of fatigue. Breath work can get rid of tension in the body. Breath work can decrease inflammation and heat. So I think it's really important that you, if you can, work with a yoga person that understands how it could be used therapeutically for you specifically.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I mean, there's even a breathing that is technically used for getting rid of headaches. It's called Brahmuri, where it's like a buzzing breath where you're like, and you keep exhaling that buzzing sound, which stimulates sort of the upper palate of your roof and sort of some of the head spaces to help relieve some of the tension in your head if you have a headache. So again, it can be used very therapeutically.
I'm doing that one. Is there a certain tongue placement when you're humming?
It just sort of rests comfortably at the roof of the mouth so that you can feel the vibration at the soft palate on the top of your roof of your mouth.
So doing that one.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Oh, it's so great. So speaking of all of these things that we've been talking about, are there things that you, without having to go to, especially now with COVID-19, without having to go to a class or sign up for new things, are there things that you feel like listeners or watchers of this podcast can do right now to help move towards optimal fertility specifically? Are there things that you would recommend, like top 3 or whatever things?
I'm going to propose something that is sort of jumping this Kosha ladder. And so, we should theoretically be going phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, but I'm going to jump a little bit and propose sort of a wisdom body exercise. And that is that I think every fertility patient looks at their journey through a certain colored glass. And, sometimes it's the blue colored lens because everything just seems awful. It's just like, oh my gosh, it's just like everything wrong is happening. And you color your entire world through this blue lens. And sometimes it's the rosy colored glass where you're like, I just know it's going to happen this time. I just feel it, and you sort of have this inflated sense of confidence because it's a new cycle or a new doctor or a new method or a new procedure. And so what I would propose is to either sit in a quiet space in terms of like a meditative practice, or if you don't meditate, then perhaps prayer would be a good place to start. And you really just ask, how do I view my fertility? What color lens do I see it? Is it rosy? Is it blue? Is it green? What shade am I really perceiving my fertility? Because ultimately, we color our journey with our thoughts. We color our journey with our experiences from our past, even things that go back to our childhood, we color. And you know this as a therapist, how much our past plays into who we are right now in this current moment. So we need to really ask, how am I coloring my lens? What are my expectations for the future? And how do I color my lens with my expectations for the future? And then really try to tease out through prayer or meditation what we're experiencing and what we're thinking in terms of coloring our experience. And because ultimately what we want is we want to view our fertility through a clear glass. And a clear glass really means that we're in this moment, that we're not caught up in fearing getting pregnant again because we had 4 miscarriages. Because as you said, it happened to me. That's a reality. I can feel sad about that. I can mourn that loss, but I don't want it to debilitate my ability to move forward because of the experience of my past. So can we let that go? Can we let that experience be there because we experienced it, but also not prohibit us from moving forward? Same thing with the future. I'm so afraid. I'm afraid of what could happen if I don't get pregnant. I'm afraid of what's going to happen if I miscarry again. Can we let go of the future? And what are the experiences that we've had that are coloring our future? So what I'm proposing is to really approach this not from an intellectual perspective, not from Googling and researching everything you can on Google forums so that you can see who had your exact same, treatment plan or your exact same diagnosis, not to pretend it doesn't exist and not to get emotional and cry your way through it, but that to really approach it from this center place, from a feeling state, which is, I feel I want to be a mom, and focus on that feeling. And once you focus on that feeling, you allow yourself and the universe to start manifesting in its magical way. And we always say to people that you will have the child you are meant to have. Mm-hmm. And if you can be open to that, if you can step into the flow of the universe, that child will be attracted to you like metal to magnet. It will come your way. And we actually even do a meditation in our book where we imagine being on the top of a mountain on this beautiful, clear day and looking down at a sea of children below us and seeing the one that is calling to us, reaching out for the one that is reaching back for our hand. And when we do that meditation, we get a lot of tears, because the real bottom line of fertility is that if you want to be a mother, you will be a mother, but you have to make that decision. And I think you more than anybody can really speak to this, right? Maria?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, gosh, I'm one of a sea of many who can speak to that.
Yeah.
Also, I want to highlight folks who I like to highlight choice in this. For folks who choose not to pursue treatments, who choose not to move forward with having a human baby, motherhood is not just having a human baby. Motherhood is it's just creation at its smallest energy point, right? It's all creativity. So the thing, like your book, it's a baby, right?
Yeah, and I love that, because we had, I taught this class called Dealing with Disappointment, and there was a woman that was going through secondary infertility, and she was really at this crossroads of how long do I keep going? Because it becomes like going to Las Vegas. You keep putting money down, you keep rolling the wheel. And so after like the 5th class, she comes bounding into class. I mean, she would cry every single class, like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. It's so sad. And then she came bounding into class all happy. And she's like, I figured it out. And we said, okay, what's going on? You seem delighted. She's like, I'm going to birth a business. And, she had a brilliant idea of how all of her experiences were going to help her birth this business. And she was going to be this mother to her business. And so when I say, that child is reaching back for you, that child could be a physical child, but it could also be the business that you birthed, the book that you wrote, whatever creative. Yes. But again, because that motherhood exists in all of us. And I also think that this is a point too, where second solutions are often very helpful too, because, sometimes we have to go through this grieving process of not being able to have a physical child or biological child of our own before we have the ability to grieve that and move on to second solutions. And so we've seen beautiful families created that way as well.
Well, yep. Like too many to count on this end. And I'm only one person on this journey. Tami, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and insight. Could you show your book one more time?
Sure.
I would love people to see that. Please pick it up, you guys. This book, I pull it off I cannot believe this is you. I pull it off my shelf all the time. It is so beautiful. There are photos in there, illustrations. It's beautiful. Just high quality, glossy pages. I like the feel of books. So I guess I'm a little nerdy that way, but the content is outstanding. So
Thank you. And you're all, if anyone's watching or listening that's interested in pursuing our virtual yoga for fertility now, we are going to be offering that online. So you're more than welcome to hop on pullingdownthemoon.com and check out our schedule, and we'd love to see you virtually.
awesome. All these things will be linked on the show notes, by the way, of course, so people can just head on over to drmariarothenberger.com and get it all there, and or wherever you are, on YouTube, wherever you are. The link should be there. Namaste, Tami.
Namaste, and thank you for having me.
I appreciate you.
Take care, you too. Bye-bye.